The immunologists have been telling this for years. They've been telling us, hey, listen, it's all human disease is all about inflammation, and we haven't listened to them. Now I'm listening.
So last week, Professor Colin Doherty told us about his challenge of the idea that epilepsy is just an electrical disorder. So now we're going to continue with some really cool stuff, exciting stuff, as science is. What if we've just been looking down the wrong alley for a solution for people with refractory epilepsy or uncontrolled seizures? Because what if a huge part of it all is about our immune systems? Let's jump in.
For people with autoimmune diseases, there has been a range of new biological therapies. So people get psoriasis and eczema and even rheumatoid arthritis no longer have to worry about the long-term effects of steroids. If you did a study, placebo-controlled study of steroids and epilepsy, okay, maybe you'd find a positive result, but you wouldn't have anybody saying, well, let's just treat people with steroids, because so many bad effects. But I think it's already opening up this idea of precision therapy. Let's find out what particular immune responses is happening in epilepsy. We know it's definitely there. Forget about the autoimmune and encephalitis stuff, right? This is in chronic, regular, everyday epilepsy. There is an immune crosstalk going on. And one of my hypotheses is, and maybe the reason that we're losing people after a month, is because there's also a physical effect on this other area of interest of mine, which is called the blood-brain barrier. And I'll just briefly do 2 words on that. So the blood-brain barrier is this unique covering of the blood vessels in the brain. Nowhere else. Your coronary arteries, your liver vascular system, nobody else has this. It's only in the brain. And it evolved in a human to protect the brain from the poisons in the environment. So when you eat the wrong food, you get sick as a dog because your stomach absorbs it, but your brain is protected from it. And so it only lets in molecules of a certain size. What we know that epilepsy does, and there's a range of diseases that do this. The other area I'm interested in is brain concussion, causes leakiness of the blood-brain barrier. So the brain barrier leaks. Big immune cells that shouldn't be in the brain are suddenly in the brain. There are activating agents, cytokines and stuff that get into the brain and activate the brain's immune system itself, which is the microglia, which are essentially macrophages in the brain. So suddenly there's this massive kind of immune response going on caused by the brain leaking. We know that steroids have a physical effect on the barrier. They close the barrier temporarily. So you can actually close the blood-brain barrier very effectively, just give big doses of steroids. And so that's why I think we're getting an initial good response lasting a month, because we're closing the barrier. And then once we stop the steroids, the barrier starts to open again. And that's why we're losing some people back to seizures. So that's my hypothesis. So, it's a complex hypothesis. It's the steroids are going in, they're dampening the immune response. They're also closing the blood-brain barrier. That's allowing the drugs now to get to their target, because, the drugs are also leaking out in a leaky barrier, not getting to the place they need to be. So now you're closing the barrier, allows the drug to get to its target. And that's why the seizures stop, in my view. And some people, because the drug has got to its target, they're the people getting a prolonged response. But in about 2/3 of those, once the steroid goes away, the barrier starts to leak again and they start to have seizures again. So that's a very complex picture, but I think it needs to be studied in detail. And I think then we need to find out what are the key elements of the immune system that are responsible for that leakage and target that, not give everybody steroids. That's not the answer, because it would cause us much morbidity as benefit, I think.
So what are the next steps for doing this research then? Are we looking at funding? Are we looking at getting more people interested? Because I can imagine some neurologists, the clinicians are going to be, well, this isn't a very sexy idea, or this goes against potentially what we already think, or, things along those lines.
I think that's true, but I would appeal to every neurologist out there who sits in clinics like I do with patients who have highly refractory epilepsy. And these people, Tori, you've spoken to them, you have had your own issues with chronic epilepsy. And you're sitting there and we say, well, we've been mining this electrical theory and it has come up with great things. There's no question. Some of the drugs that we have now that have transformed people's lives came through that hypothesis. But we need to move. We need to start thinking more creatively now about the other things. And I would say this is not a new idea. This is an old idea. Let's go and revisit the old ideas. And the old idea is epilepsy causes brain injury, and the response to injury is the immune response. And why don't we start thinking about that? We're in the middle of a study at the moment where So the blood-brain barrier theory has come, that hypothesis has arrived slightly separately, but we're actually doing two different studies at the moment. One is we're doing an MRI, looking at the blood-brain barrier. We're giving them high-dose steroids, and we're looking at the effect on the barrier after it. And then the second study, which I really like, and one of my PhD students, Isabel Hunt, is doing, is we're looking at the blood-brain barrier in patients with highly refractory epilepsy. And then when a clinician makes a clinical decision to change the treatment, once they change it, we will redo the look at the barrier again. So we're looking at this, and all the while, even though it's an imaging-based study, we're also measuring all these different immune cells that are leaking to and from the barrier into the parenchyma of the brain, in the hope to build a picture of what precision therapies should we be targeting in the immune system. It's a big project. It's got a lot of legs. We need international partners. We need to do much more than just small studies that we can do, because these are expensive. Like, we're doing imaging pre and post treatment, and they're expensive treatment studies, and all the what's called transcriptomics now, which is this idea of looking at all the serological markers, the RNA associated with differentially expressed genes. So in other words, there are genetic elements in the cell which generate the immune response. Most of these genes may be on and off. Just looking at the genes is no longer good enough. So now we look at the genes that are actually active by looking at what's called their transcriptome. And that's a huge area. And we can measure thousands of these things. And we're collaborating with collaborators in Hiroshima in Japan on massive machines that they have. And they've got mathematicians looking at this. And that's really expensive. So there's a lot of work to be done, but I think it's just in a sense, I'm sort of embarrassed that we haven't done this already. I'm embarrassed on behalf of the profession of epileptology that we have not done this already,
Well, for sure. I can very much understand that. And also, I imagine about half our listeners are people with epilepsy or family members. And I imagine there's a little bit of frustration out there as well. Like, why has this not been looked at? Is it because it's not a sexy topic, or are there other factors?
I'm not a conspiracy theorist by any means, but I also understand that there are sometimes, commercial and other things which drive research in a particular direction. But I actually just think it's the way we're all trained. Like, I'm as guilty as the next person. Like, I've been doing this for 30 years and I'm only doing this now. Like, we were trained to think about it as an electrical disease. Our forefathers, our heroes of epileptology, going back to the Queen Square in the 19th century, were telling us it's about electricity.
And that's it.
And then, we all train that way and we think about it. And I did my fellowship in the United States, and it was all about electrical waves, and electricity is clearly part of it. But there's something else there that was, hiding in plain sight. And look, our colleagues in the lab have been telling us, listen, this is important. You need to be taking this seriously. And we're, don't bother us with that. We're mining this electrical.
Oh.
And there's still work to be done in the electrical hypothesis, and still some new drugs coming which have an effect on dampening electrical responses, and they will be valuable. And I wouldn't turn that off, but we need to have a decision to go down this route and bring new people in, immunologists and stuff, bring them into that's what I was hoping to do with this editorial. Yes, to speak to my colleagues a little bit, but actually say to immunology guys, come on in, let's make this a thing now,
Well, if we've got, it depends what paper or source you get, but between 50 and 75 million people with an epilepsy around the world, take 30% of those who, could benefit from this. Hello? That's a lot of people, right?
That's a lot of people, And even the 10% with the sustained response, I can tell you that to most epileptologists, and if you're a patient who's been through every single drug and has been told, listen, there's very little else we can do, and you've tried the ketogenic diet and you've had a surgical evaluation and you've either had surgery that hasn't worked, or you've been told surgery won't work, and you've had a VNS in, and all that's been done, and somebody goes, well, there's nothing else to do really. And I'm saying, no, that's, I just don't agree with that, I think we need to look at this. It's not going to work for everybody. It's not going to work for everybody. And that's important. But as you say, 30% is a big number.
The immunology, I think through COVID, it's virology, it became more widely known of. And I think if we can bring that sort of awareness and knowledge into the epilepsies, that would be quite exciting.
Yeah, one of the thoughts I have actually is a little around what's happened in cancer. Cancer has become an immunological disease, essentially, I mean, there are now diseases of cancer which are being cured by either externally bringing in an immune therapy or by stimulating the body's own immune system. Like, I don't know if you know about these PD-1 inhibitors. So in cancer of the lung, right, one of the problems with cancer of the lung is that the cancer grows, with sunglasses on. It pretends it's normal tissue and the immune system is asleep around it. And that's because it excretes this thing which keeps the immune system sleepy, right? So what you do is if you give them this PD-1 inhibitor, then suddenly the immune system wakes up and recognizes the lung cancer as a foreign body and attacks it. And that's 25% of people now are surviving long-term with lung cancer. I mean, that's so unbelievable.
That is so cool.
We actually have a fully funded chair in what's called immuno-oncology. And it's a guy called Patrick Ford who's come from Johns Hopkins, and he's the guy who's done those seminal work that's been published in the New England Journal on curing lung cancer. So I think, if cancer is moving into the immune system, we shouldn't be far behind, right? And obviously MS has always been an inflammatory, autoimmune disease. Neurodegeneration has always flirted with the immuno hypothesis as well. It hasn't really delivered. There are some new treatments now. Aducanumab is out there for Alzheimer's disease. I don't think that's the real future. But again, it's ploughing an immunotherapy line. Of course, the immunologists have been telling this for years. They've been telling us, hey, listen, it's all human disease is all about inflammation. And we haven't listened to them. Now I'm listening.
Well, I'm sure diseases aren't all about one thing, but to leave, right. But to leave one potential cause out is just nuts, isn't it? And just think of the suffering and literal deaths of people that could potentially be prevented if we look at immunotherapy. So for anyone listening, whether it's a clinician researcher or somebody with an epilepsy, what would you say? What do we need to do?
We need to get the immunologists, the people who live in this world, interested in this, and they need to be asking, for serum samples and samples of spinal fluid and start to analyze, the different components of the immune system and the different forms of epilepsy. That's the first thing. The vascular biology people like Matt and his group and Chris Green now in RCSI and Claire Behan, who's there, we've all cut our teeth on this theory about the blood-brain barrier in epilepsy. Claire actually published that series of cases of surgery, 7 people who had terrible blood-brain barrier dysfunction, then had surgery and the barrier then improved itself. So there's a bit of work to be done on the blood-brain barrier people. So it's kind of bringing all these people together, and then we need to do some clinical trials. I mean, clinical trials, this, as you know, this big gap between, why hasn't there been a proper study of steroids in epilepsy? And that gap, when we come up with the hypothesis, because it costs so much to do clinical trials. And, but I think there are funding agencies now that are open to this idea of investigator-led studies, and we need to get people into clinical trials and start really understanding this better. And then, in my envisagement for the future, in the next 5 to 10 years, there would be a number of precision therapies, purely immune-based, for people with epilepsy. We will be able to stratify people into the people who will respond to immunotherapy, and they will not get anti-epileptic drugs. They will not be on anti-epileptic drugs. They will get treated with an immune therapy. They may need to have it intermittently, but imagine that. That's an interesting future, isn't it?
Exciting, I think, is the word, rather than just interesting, exciting. And for people who have an epilepsy, specifically refractory epilepsy, what can they do to support this work, this research? I mean, do we jump on the government or?
Well, I think the more, what I would like is that when people go in to see their doctor, and it really has to be in a tertiary epilepsy center. I don't think people in their GPs and stuff can be expected to prescribe people immunotherapy. Do you know what I mean? But if they're attending a tertiary or a quaternary specialist epilepsy center, I think they need to ask their doctor when they're having that conversation, as many people have had, well, we've kind of done everything we can. That's a kind of hard conversation to have. And, even the most optimistic thing is we're going to revisit some of these drugs that you tried before and in different combinations. And when somebody said, well, actually, can I not try this immunotherapy? What else have I got to lose? I know there's still a lot more to learn about it. But you know what I mean? Is there something to be said for giving immunotherapy? And I think that will get a lot of my colleagues on the same page. They'll be coming to our publications and going, oh yeah, this is interesting. I know if it was my family, if it was me, and again, setting aside all the problems that steroids would have, if I had tried everything and epilepsy was defining my life now, I'd be asking for intravenous steroids. And I would take all the caveats, the safety issues, I'd sign whatever I needed to sign, but I would be taking it.
Okay. This has left me with way more questions than answers, in a good way. Thank you to Colin for making us, well, myself anyway, truly excited about what future research may discover. Because imagine if science discovers more about autoimmune epilepsies that could lead to reducing 30% of people for whom drugs do not control their seizures. And what if it could lead to something preventing the removal of brain tissue in some? What if it made life feel more worth living for those of us affected in this way? Now, of course, there is like a nuts, crazy amount of work to do, requiring an equally nuts amount of funding. But keep your eyes on Colin for developments. And a huge thank you to him for being with us on the podcast. See you next time.